National MS Society in the United States. And for anybody familiar with the US, I reside in Colorado. I have to admit, it is bright and early here this morning, and I am partially caffeinated at this point. So we'll see how this goes. I'm going to spend the bulk of my presentation talking about how we transitioned from digital events back into in-person fundraising. But first, I know that many of you are still doing digital fundraising, or you're kind of trying to figure this out. And in the United States, we're doing some digital and some in person. So I wanted to take just a few minutes and talk about some of the key learnings that we've had over the last 20 months from our digital programs with you. The pictures that you see on the screen are from an event that we hosted in September of 2020, so not too long after the pandemic started. And this is an event called Keep Moving Forward. This was an online experience like no other that drew over 16,000 viewers through YouTube and through Facebook. And it was a first of its kind for the National MS Society. In the top right corner, you'll see our MCs for the evening that were live in the experience. And the rest of the program was done with an event production company for a very small fee. And it was a series of pre-recorded videos from people living with MS, scientists, and so much more. So a few of the things that we've learned many things, but I think something that everybody knows, and it was just an opportunity for us to reaffirm this, is the most important part about a digital experience is truly that the authentic and powerful stories are the most important component. Stories draw people in, they hook them into your program, but we did have a few key learnings, on just timing of those stories. So we know that adults have a small attention span, especially online. So it's important to keep those stories short, very focused, and powerful. We found that a story couldn't be pre-recorded for longer than 5 minutes, but really that sweet spot is about 2 to 3 minutes. We also learned that pre-recording those versus having them live was a better way to keep people from rambling and make sure that they really touched on the most powerful points of their story. We also learned that using an easy platform for everyone to access is extremely key. So we partnered with a production company that for all of our events that we did digital, that would run the back end logistics. And because we didn't have any expenses otherwise to actually produce the event, we were able to spend our money there. And the company we used was just for a few $1,000s. And they were able to broadcast at the same time many of our events to YouTube and Facebook, which would then increase our viewership. But YouTube is just such an easy platform to use. We also learned the power of leveraging social media and social media influencers. So the picture that you see in the bottom left, and then the picture that you see on the right here, these are influencers in the United States. So one is an actress from the Hallmark Channel, which is kind of a cheesy movie channel. And then the woman on the right is actually an actress that is not an actress, she's a famous dress designer for wedding dresses in the United States. Neither of them had a connection to MS, but they had a broad following base. And we were able to connect into them, and they shared our events. And that really helped our viewership, which then helped our online giving that evening. So I know that all of us at this point are tired of living in this virtual environment, but there's a lot of really great ways to engage your audience. And I encourage you to be thinking about those as you're producing events. So that can be as simple as having trivia during a presentation or doing some kind of polling. We also did some fun and creative things like partnering with food companies and sending a bottle of wine to our VIP donors, or as simple as sending a box service or a gift card or coupon discount card so they could order food online. And that goes for whether it's an in-person fundraising or an event or a service or program that you have in your country. The last key learning that I would share in terms of fundraising events is we have learned that the first year of virtual fundraising went very well. The second year, we struggled. We struggled more with attendance and we struggled more with revenue. So we had to factor that in to our budgeting process as we were planning for our next fiscal year. And I don't know if any of you have had that experience, but I think it's important to point out in case this is something that you're thinking about for your upcoming events. So after 16 months with no in-person events for the National MS Society, we decided to make a return to in-person events for some locations, not for all of them. And we went through a very thorough and rigorous health and safety mitigation process that had multiple checkpoints and balances along the way to ensure that we really were creating the safest environment for everybody involved. So things that we looked at were conditions of disease transmission in a community, vaccination rates, restrictions per jurisdiction. And then we also did a formal review for each event that was done 90, 60, and 30 days prior to the event. So between May 2021, when we had our very first return to in-person event, we have held nearly 80 events thus far. And those events were from our Bike MS series to our luncheons and galas, and to recently our first donor experience that we held just last week. I am happy to share that we have brought thousands of people together in that time, and we have actually only had 12 reported COVID cases, and none of them we've been able to directly tie back to our events. So many of those cases really did come from maybe a staff that had exposure in the home, but they reported it to us post-event. But I feel like we feel very good about that. Certainly 0 would have been much better though. This spring, we are planning on holding our Walk MS series in person again, which, as you can imagine, brings thousands of members from the MS community together. So we made a decision very early on not to hold this event because we knew bringing a large crowd of individuals in a walking environment, many of which are living with MS, just wasn't a good idea at the time. But those events will resume again in March, and we have a lot of individuals that are very excited to see those back again. So I'd love to spend a little time walking you through the actual process that we followed over the last several months. But I will admit it has been a very timely process. It's been a little bit daunting, but it has ensured that we have made proper and safe choices along the way. So where we start is the staff members that are holding the event come together with their supervisor and then all others that would be involved in planning the event in the local community. And they discuss several factors that I'm going to dive into in a minute. And then for the first several months that we were back in person, those decisions that those local teams made, they were taken all the way up to our CEO leadership team, which includes our CEO, Cindy Zaggy Boilo, and they got a formal approval from that point. We asked ourselves an abundance of questions as we were deciding if we should be hosting in-person events or not. And I just want to highlight a few of them. There were 4 key questions that we asked ourselves that you can kind of see described in pictures on this particular slide. So first we asked ourselves, was hosting an event even possible in a specific city or state? In the United States, each state and city has made very different safety decisions when it comes to COVID, and they've put different limitations on size of gatherings, and each venue in each community is different as well. So we might find ourselves in Chicago where the decision was only 10 people could come together, or we might have been talking about Arizona where a couple hundred people would come together. So that was a really easy first question to ask, just to determine, can we even bring the crowd that we want to bring together? And if we couldn't, then automatically we decided this just wasn't an event we could hold in person at the time. Second, we would look at the vaccination rates in the local communities, and we also looked at the vaccine policies and protocol at each venue. We knew that the higher the vaccination rate, then theoretically or hopefully the lower the rate of transmission that we could potentially see in the community at an event. So we did use that as a guide to help us as well. After that, we would ask ourselves, do we have volunteers that are ready to be in person again? As you all know, it takes an army of volunteers and staff to make an in-person gathering come together, especially the day of an event. So we would test the waters a little bit, and we would call some of our volunteers. We'd start to understand where they were and if they felt comfortable coming back in person. And we would use that to judge our overall volunteer readiness. And we would find ourselves, sometimes we would get to this point where we would say, all other factors are good, but we need 50 volunteers to help us make this happen. And we don't feel like we can get 50 volunteers. So we would have to make that difficult decision to not bring people in person, but instead to host a digital experience or just cancel the event altogether. And then lastly, we looked at hospital rates of the cities that the events were held in. So this question was very specific to events that were sporting based events. So as an example, our biking series. So we know that because of the rigor of a biking event, it's common that at least one person will go to the hospital after a bike ride because of some form of injury. Sometimes we end up with a few people in the hospital after a bike ride, and we wanted to make sure that we weren't putting any extra stress on the hospital systems. And if the systems were at capacity in any given community, we would also make a decision not to host the event. Beyond these basic questions, we would ask ourselves other things like, is there going to be reputational risk by holding or not holding this event? Will our sponsors and donors support returning to an in-person environment? So sometimes we found that our corporate sponsors weren't sending their employees to events, and they weren't financially supporting organizations that had in-person events. So that sometimes also ended up being the guide at the end of the day. And then the last question that we broadly asked ourselves is, will we have enough space so people can safely distance at the event? That became extra important when it came to our luncheons and our galas that are more social in nature, and there's a lot more networking that takes place. So we're going to skip forward, and I'm going to share what we did when we decided to actually come together for an in-person event. I know that you can't read all the words on the slide necessarily, but I did want to stop and explain this. So we built a health screening process for every participant and volunteer that came to an event. And this is not something that we went out and we paid a company to do. This is something that we worked with our own technology team, and they built a very simple form for us. I believe it was called a JOT form, if that sounds like a familiar technology term for anybody. And we sent this form out to all of our participants 48 hours prior to the event. And for them to get into the event, they had to go in and they had to look at the health screening questionnaire and mark whether they agreed or disagreed with it. If you look to the very right, this is an example of somebody that passed the screening, they agreed, and they got a green check mark. To get into our events, you needed that green check mark. If you did not pass the screening, then you got a circle with a red X in it, and you did not have access to the event that day. So here's some of the questions that we put on the health screening. So they're very simple. I am not currently experiencing any symptoms. I have not experienced body aches or pains over the last 10 days. I have not experienced a fever or higher in the last 24 hours. I have not tested, nor has anybody in my family tested positive. I have no reason to believe I have COVID. I am not currently on quarantine. And of course, the final, which was a waiver, which is that I understand the contagious nature, and I assume all risks associated with attending this event. So those were the guides that we used. We use these based on the information available in the United States. And if somebody came to the event and for some reason they had not received an email prior, we had all these questions available on a large printed sign, and we could have the questionnaire in person, or we would ask them to pull it up on their phone in the moment and go through that link. This just gave us that extra layer of protection, and it really made everybody that was attending stop and think and realize just how serious we were taking everything. Excuse me. The next component for our events, it was our event signage. So this screenshot just shares a couple of examples of different signs that we had at our event. I apologize, early in the morning. We had large signs placed all over our venues just to remind people to wear a mask, to stay distanced and stay 6 feet apart. We also did these kind of swing bys or drive bys for individuals that were picking up packets for their bike day. So the second sign you see there is just inviting people to stay into their car and to wear a mask while speaking with our staff. The first sign is my favorite. It's a simple task between sips and bites, wear a mask. And this was placed at all of our events, reminding people when they weren't eating or drinking that we did need them to keep their masks on. I will say people weren't 100% compliant all the time, but we did a really great job of making sure our safety standards were very known and very clear at all of our events. Now, I'd love to spend just a little bit of time. I know you're getting a lot of robust information from me and hope probably a little bit more than you need, but I'm hoping you're going to walk away with some tidbits of information here or there. But I'd love to talk just a little bit about the difference between a luncheon and a dinner and bringing together people for that environment that's a little bit more of an intimate gathering versus bringing people together for a sporting event. So the pictures that you see on the screen, these are pictures of a few of our luncheons and our dinners that we've held over the last year. The first thing I'd say is we encouraged all of our staff to hold their events outdoors this year. We knew that the transmission rates were higher indoors and we wanted to do our part. And it is not very common for us to host these type of events outdoors. So it was a big shift for us, but it was a shift at the end of the day that was very welcomed, and we got very creative on the different locations that we hosted things. So we hosted events in football stadiums. We hosted them in baseball stadiums, rooftop restaurants. And then my absolute favorite is we hosted a few events at a drive-in movie theater. So if you see this picture on the bottom left, this is a picture of our staff that hosted a gala as a drive-in movie theater evening. The theme was neon nights, hence the staff are all dressed in their fun colors from, well, I would say they're from the 80s. And what they did is they invited everybody to come to a very old-fashioned movie theater where you had the screen outdoors. And we had about 50 cars that were there. The cars came in and they stayed in their cars that evening. There was a very simple boxed meal that was delivered to all of the cars. And then the program was projected on the movie theater screen. So they did a full program. And then after, they invited all their participants to stay and to watch a movie. So it was a unique experience. And I think one of the things that we learned about our events is we need to do a lot of things more creatively in the future. So a couple of things in addition that we asked everybody to do. So we asked everybody to wear a mask. There was a short period of time over the summer when things were looking really well in the United States. And so we didn't have the requirement, just the recommendation for masks, but we are currently requiring our participants to wear them. We made sure that we had hand sanitizer available on all the tables and at registration. It was all over every event we had. We also had a contactless registration where guests were able to check in prior to the event via an online technology platform called Give Smart. And that just helped with, getting people into the event and making sure that we were not drawing big crowds at any time. We didn't have buffets, we didn't have past appetizers or any shared wine bottles at the table. Everything that we did with food service was extremely safe. We did a lot of covered meals. We even did some events where we had the event and then participants were invited to actually take their box lunch home. So not our norm, but nothing has been the norm for the last couple of years, as everybody knows. We also did a really great job of spacing out our tables. You can see that in the top right corner. Oftentimes our tables are very scrunched together, but we made sure they were 6 to 8 feet apart and that we didn't have as many chairs at those tables as we have in the past. You can see we've just gotten very, very creative. And I can say with all of our events that went back, all of our fundraising events that went back in person, we had a very successful year. We achieved our budget on those events. Oftentimes we exceeded it. And we found that individuals in the communities, they weren't coming out if they weren't ready, but the people that were coming out to our events have just been so excited to be back in person again. So, oops, I skipped right past. All right. So, my last slide, just want to talk a little bit about what it looks like when you have an actual sporting event. And what you see on screen are pictures from our bike series. You might be aware that we have the largest bike series, I believe, in the world. And this was quite a lift to change a lot of things with our bike. And I'm highlighting bike, but we have other events such as a hiking event or snowmobiling event that lived within the same protocol. So here's some of the changes that we made. Traditionally, our bike rides are actually an overnight biking experience. And for the first 5 months that we were back in person, we transitioned to a 1 day ride only. We changed all of the courses of our ride to bring our riders together safely, and we vastly changed the experience of the ride as well. Commonly, we would have team tents where everybody's team could gather, they could rally together, but we did not have those this year. Instead, we encouraged our participants to show their spirit through a jersey competition and other fun ways. We also wanted to make sure that we were limiting the actual touch points and physical interactions. So we did not distribute medals this year. We have since learned how important those medals are for all of our riders. So we are bringing them back in the future. But for this year only, it's just something we didn't feel like we could do. We also had dedicated lanes and waiting spots for people to really aid in physical distancing. So we would give people a window of time that they would be starting the bike ride to minimize the number of people in the crowd at the particular time. We were very careful with our portable toilets. They were staged, they were spaced, that we had the touch-free hand washing stations and the sanitizers in those and along the route. And then other things that people were commonly accustomed to, we have a mission area, we have team photos, massages available on site. All of those were put on pause during this particular time, and we look forward to the day that they can make a comeback. And just a couple more things. So we did invite our cyclists to bring their own water bottles, and we had individual water bottles that were available for refills as well. And our rest stops, going along with that theme of that prepackaged food, everything was prepackaged and waiting, and it was self-serve for the participants, where typically we would have our volunteers serving, and it would be a very robust process. So those are some of the changes that we've made in the United States. And I'm very curious how everybody else is doing this, but I hope that you were able to take a few key nuggets. And we're not going to pause for questions. We are going to do questions at the end. But if you have any for me, please write them down so you don't forget them. And I believe I'm going to turn it back over to you, Shauna, and we are going to watch a video from our friend Rob in Australia.
Hi, thank you so much, Liz. That was brilliant. It was really great to hear the importance of sort of storytelling and engaging community and returning to in-person events. And thank you so much for all the tips about staying safe and returning to events, and for taking us through your COVID guidelines and signs. That was brilliant. And your drive-through movie night sounds so fun and creative. So thank you very much. I know it was very early for you. So I think we're going to go, Bon is now going to put on Rob's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you today. Apologies that I can't be with you either in person or at the meeting. Australian time zones just don't allow for it. But hopefully this recorded presentation will give you guys some insights into the exciting world of returning to in-person fundraising, which I am very, very excited to get back to as an event fundraiser that's been with Multiple Sclerosis Limited for the past 4 years. Our events have been heavily impacted by COVID, like many people around the world. So to now think about being back at an event village, delivering some amazing cycle, run, swimming events for our participants is really exciting. And I'm really excited to share some of the insights that we have about returning to in-person fundraising. So today, what I would like to cover is to give you a little sense of what our portfolio looked like here at Multiple Sclerosis Limited in 2019, and then what it looked like in 2020 and 2021 after the pandemic hit. I'll chat very briefly about the impacts of COVID-19 and what we did to pivot to some virtual events, like similar to many people, I'm sure, and then plans for the rest of 2021 and more importantly into 2022, and how we're preparing to get back to face-to-face fundraising at events. So in 2019, MSL held 24 physical events, and we did not have a virtual event portfolio at all. Our largest event is the Sydney to Gong Cycle Ride that has 10,000 people, capped at 10,000 people, and sells out every year and raises just over 3 million. Our walks take place in multiple locations. We have walks in every state and territory that we operate in, which is New South Wales, Victoria, the Australian Capital Territory, and Tasmania. Our Melbourne Cycle and Half Marathon is similar to the Gong Ride in its style, but down on the south coast in Melbourne. And our mega challenges, we can have up to 18, 19, 20 of those a year. They're quite local events in swimming pools all across Australia in our metropolitan areas, but also in regional and rural Australia. So our portfolio is quite diverse, it's very broad, and we bring in around 26,000 people a year pre-pandemic to our events, and that raised about $5.5 million. Physical events represented a very important income stream for the organisation. We were one of the larger income streams for the organisation, so anything that does affect our events does have a massive impact on the services that we can provide for people living with MS. Like a lot of organisations in Australia and indeed all around the world, COVID had a huge impact on our operations. On the 12th of March 2020, we cancelled 13 events, 16,000 people we had to contact on that day. Many of our events had only just begun in terms of our campaign, our recruitment campaigns, they may have only just begun. Some were very close to the event. We had one event, our Wollongong Mega Challenge, that was happening 2 days later. Our Melbourne Cycle half marathon was happening just the following week. So whilst we did cancel events during that period, people had already signed up and started fundraising. So we did generate some funds across 2020 and 2021 from our physical events, but it was very sporadic. It was hard to plan for any events, particularly as in Australia, the different states and territories all had different restrictions based on the local COVID outbreaks that were taking place. So 2020 and much of 2021 has really been a write-off for physical events. So as with most of the fundraising event world, we pivoted as quickly as we could to virtual events. Now, as I said earlier, we at the organisation didn't have a history of virtual events. The platforms, for the most part, that we were operating off weren't able to facilitate virtual events. And so we had a bit of a job to do to try and do as much as we could to continue to raise funds with the products that we had. We did go out to our Melbourne Cycle and Half Marathon people to do the event virtually. As mentioned, it was only about 10 days from event when we cancelled. And so measuring the success of that was quite difficult. What we do know over the time period that we of 2020 is that we had about 5,900 participants take part in some sort of a virtual event for us, raising 1.4 million. Clearly, that is a huge drop from the 5.5 that we were raising in 2019, and 2021, we're coming towards the end, whilst slightly improved, is not going to do too much better than that in terms of the income that we generate. So returning to physical events does represent a massive opportunity for us at multiple sclerosis. We thought we were able to return to physical events earlier this year as we came out of our first extended lockdown, and we were confident enough to launch our largest event, the Signage Cycle Ride, at the end of May. What that does show us, though, are the trends that we hope will continue into 2022. The Gong Ride, as mentioned, always sells out. However, what we found this year was that we sold 5,000, which was our cap at that point, 5,000 participants in 7 days. That was a record for us, which really illustrates that people are hungry to get back to doing events and attending mass participation events. There seemed to be no hesitation at that point of being at a mass participation event with crowds. That said, it was pre our second lockdown, but we are hoping as we launch again today that we will sell out our second 5,000 just as quickly. We're hoping at least by Christmas we'll have a 10,000 sold out event. We also saw that we had a 78% increase in fundraising against the same period in 2019, which indicates that the rest that people had, whilst we may have seen a decline in income in 2020, hopefully once we get back, that income is going to bounce back and do more. That's what the trends show us. Unfortunately, we obviously had to put a postponement on the Signage Gong ride. It should have taken place at the start of November. However, the investment that we have to commit up front was just too high with the uncertainty that was around still in August and September. We have a new date in May, which is why we've relaunched this week to try and sell out to the 10,000 people, and already trends again are showing that we should sell out by Christmas. So thinking about returning to in-person fundraising and thinking about some of the tactics for success as we all return, we saw an increase in leads for the MS Gong ride. So lead and a lead campaign, an expressions of interest campaign, I think is going to be really important before you actually open up your registrations. Leads have a much lower CPA than direct registrations as well. So as we're all aware, the issues with Facebook being a primary avenue for acquisition and the increases of acquisition costs there, leads do represent a really good opportunity for people. And we were able to provide leads with early and exclusive entry to really make them feel like they were getting something ahead of the crowd. It also meant that there was a sense of urgency that this period, this exclusivity period, was for a short time only, and they needed to get in quick. And that definitely contributed to our sellout in 7 days. What we also did this time, more so than usual, was around our warm-up communications for retention. We provided calendar reminders that they could download and put into their own calendars about when the event would launch, and provided high-value past participants again with early exclusive entry. We were talking to them quite a lot before we actually launched, getting them ready and warming them up for the event, generating that excitement, particularly because we'd had such a long time between the end of the 2019 event and us launching initially in May 2021. We also are implementing a referral campaign. So we're using referral marketing to generate new acquisition from our existing participants. So this basically means that what we're doing is providing unique access codes to participants to share with their family and friends. What we have done is tied that to an incentive that if 5 or more people use that code when they're signing up, then they will go in the draw to win a custom kit, which can be worn on the day with their team, with their 5+ friends taking part in the Gong ride. These were our main strategic tactics to increase retention and to lower our overall CPA. And we saw initially in May that we hit those goals. Obviously, one of the bigger considerations is what has COVID done to event operations from a physical perspective, and what types of things do we need to be considering as we go forward and plan an event in a post-COVID world. Whilst we did see very strong registration trends, we do acknowledge that there will be some sections of the community that may be hesitant to return to large-scale mass participation events. And we need to consider what changes that we will make to the operational delivery of our events, particularly when a few of our events are highly participated by people living with multiple sclerosis, and we acknowledge that that group of people may be wary of large crowds quite soon after the COVID pandemic has started to die down. So what we would suggest is to create a simple digital registration form accessible through a QR code for registrations on the day, which means you remove any paper. What we try to do in all of our planning is to minimize interaction, the interactions that people have to have at close proximity with event staff, or sharing of equipment and touching lots of things. So as well as that, thinking about ensuring that all vendors at event day only accept contactless payment, really trying to lower those touch point opportunities. Of course, providing free hand sanitizer to all participants. We're also considering increasing the number of start waves that we have. So as opposed to setting everyone off at one point, breaking it down into 2, 3, or 4 waves and sending people off in smaller groups. It will increase, obviously, the length of the event, but if you're able to provide people with upfront information around what their start time will be, I think that will go a long way to making those people more comfortable. I think it's really important that we publish our COVID safe plans to show people exactly what we're doing on the ground, and these steps that we're talking about now, the steps that we're taking. And then finally, of course, we would be considering, you would need to consider if you're going to require participants to provide their vaccination status. That may be different in country to country, location to location. But consideration will need to be made around how you collect that information, how you then store that information, and how you police people coming onto site. If you have open sites like we do at our walks and our cycles. So overall, I think there is a lot to think about in terms of returning to in-person fundraising. From a fundraising and a marketing point of view, I think the future is really, really bright. Trends that we are seeing show that people are ready to get back to events, and that the events that they attend, we are raising more. The average donation is increasing, and we're seeing the trends are definitely of an increased fundraising nature. From an operational point of view, I think there's a lot to think about in terms of how you actively show people that your event is a COVID safe event, and there's probably going to be a lot of focus on that from our communities. Again, I'm really sorry that I wasn't able to be there with you today, but I'm very happy for my contact details to be passed around by the organisers, and if anyone would like to reach out and have a chat at any point, I'd gladly have a conversation. Enjoy the rest of your presentations, and I look forward to hearing how all your events go around the world.
Stop screen sharing. Yeah.
Yep, that was brilliant. Thank you, Sarah, for your brilliant presentation on the power of stewardship, the focus on the importance of tailored communications and how we put the donor first. So thank you. And also about getting the most out of planning and stewardship communication. So thank you. So yes, we're going to go into the panel for some Q&As now. So I'm going to invite Liz back as well. Hi, Liz. And then go to the floor with some questions. We have some. Just.
Abdul, Paulina, do you want to come on, put your cameras on? And Donna, if you have cameras, sorry, I should put mine on too. So if there's any questions that Abdul, Paulina and Donna have been reading from the chat, do you want to kind of take it in turn to ask the questions, if it's a question for everybody or just for one of our presenters? Obviously, Rob in Australia cannot answer,
No.
but for Liz and Sarah or Shona, Luke, can you come on too if there's any insights you could maybe give?
Hey guys, how you doing?
Hi, Zoe. I'm sorry, I won't be able to put on my camera because I'm not home and the connection is very bad. So I'm here and I have some questions, but I'll just not be able to put on my camera.
Okay, so
That's
Donna, do you
great.
want to start?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so you give your first question.
Okay, so I have a question from Naji from Yemen. He was asking if it's possible to prepare some information and present them to the society, whether by MSIF or by the organizations that have previously collected donations in the past.
Don't know. Sorry, can you just qualify what they mean by present some information? What is it exactly they were asking for? Sorry.
So he was asking if we can just show those information to the organizations and to like people who are working in this field. This is the question.
Okay, I might come at this from an MSIF perspective because I think this sounds like the sort of thing that we could handle. I don't think this is. I'm sure Liz or Sarah don't want to be don't want to be doing this. So, I think if you email Duna or Abdul after the session with the sort of list of the most useful information that you want, we can perhaps put together a summary of the presentation and of some of the key messages and information that people that you might like. So please just let us know after the session.
And just to say, the presentation is being recorded, so we can send that out in Arabic, Spanish, and English after this is finished. Go on, Abdul.
Yes, we have Wadia Ramadan from, I think, Lebanon. She was saying that they have set up a platform for donation with our friends in France. So I assume other society in France supporting them this. And they were saying, they were asking, what are the places or audience or that they can reach out to collect donations. So I think it's they're here looking for how they can expand on this, how they can reach out and get more donation coming in. And I would assume, it's not clear, but I assume they mean through the platform they have just set up recently.
Sarah or Liz, would one of you like to take that?
Yeah, can you sum up that question one more time for me?
It's an organization in Lebanon that set up a platform, a digital platform to collect donation. And they were asking how can they reach out to get people to donate, basically. But I think it was a slightly broad question, so I don't know whether they mean individual, but also it could be, I don't know, companies, corporate, or wider. So I think it's more about activation of their donation platform, if you like.
Okay, I mean, I don't know if I'll answer it exactly, but I'll take a stab at it from my perspective. So I think there's a couple important things that you can do. First of all, you can make one-on-one phone calls to those donors or individuals and volunteers that are closest to you and let them know that you've launched the platform, direct them to that, invite them to share it with others. You can also make sure that you're sharing it on, any social media outlet or asking those closest to you to share it on a social media outlet. And then you can include it in any mailing campaigns or mailers that you might have coming up so people are directed to it. And then the last thing that's coming to my mind is any corporations or companies that you might work with. I think it's worth a call to let them know if it's somebody they're very close with that they could share with their employees or see if there's other ways that they could help spread the word. So those are the things coming to my mind with that question. I hope I got the essence of the question right.
Great, thank you, Liz. Sarah, anything you'd like to add into that?
Yeah, I think I'd agree. I think it's about starting with your warmest supporters, who are the people that already know you and support you. And even if you don't have large numbers of those people, that's okay. As Liz says, it's you know, if you've got a very small number, it's about being able to reach out to those people one-on-one and say to them, how can we engage your network? You know, I often talk about it's kind of like this circle of going out of people. You want to start with the people right there in the center, and then your next circle will be who they know. So as Liz said, the companies, can they get it out to their employees? Your communities, can they share it with their wider communities? So start with who you already have, make sure they know about that platform, and then ask them how they could share it to get it out further.
That's great, and I think I might just add one little thing into that as well, because I think that that's excellent advice and exactly what I was gonna suggest. And I think that beyond that, when you want to start reaching out to those wider audiences, it's a good idea just to be thoughtful about what opportunities you've got coming up to engage people, so that, you know, because the digital platform is just the way that they're going to donate. So going back to Sarah and Liz's presentations, you have to think about why they're going to donate. So if there are opportunities to engage before you start asking them for money, you know, make sure you're building those relationships so that when you do then go out to ask for money, you have those opportunities. Those people are feeling warm, and going back to Sarah's graph, people are feeling warm and connected to your cause. So it's not just always asking for money. So just, you know, find those opportunities to really where you're actually touching people's lives, not just asking for money.
Sorry, Luke, can you move the mic a bit away from your...
Oh, sorry.
It's
It's a new headset. It just arrived 2 minutes before the call started, so apologies for that.
So if you just mute when you're not talking, because we can hear you breathing. Okay.
Okay, I should just move that away. Okay.
Paulina, maybe?
Okay. Oh, you're on mute, Paulina.
Hola. Hello. Good morning. Yes. Sorry. I'm in my kitchen. As you can see, there are lots of hellos and congratulations from the Spanish-speaking world, from Spain, Dominican Republic, Montevideo, and Uruguay. But I do have one question. I hope it's not too controversial. To those who are already doing in-person fundraising, are you asking participants to disclaim whether they have been vaccinated or not?
I'm happy to answer that question. That can be quite a controversial question. That is a conversation that we have had time and time again in the United States, really trying to figure out what to do. So as of this moment, we are not asking people to share their vaccination status with us. However, we are following the local and state jurisdiction. So we do have states, New York is an example, that require a vaccination card to get into any venue, any restaurant. And so in those cases, we are following what that local government is mandating us to do, and that guides the decision. And then in other cases, we have venues that also require a vaccination card for somebody to get into a venue, and we follow the venue guidance there. So we are really letting other people kind of guide that decision in many ways for us. And then when it comes to actually showing the vaccination card, we are not letting our staff one-on-one handle that process. We feel like that's just a little bit too much for our staff to take on. And so we're working with the locations and the venues. And even if we have to pay a little bit of an extra fee, we are having them do that as a checkpoint. And it is a controversial topic for sure, which is, I think, another great thing about our government starting to kind of guide us on some of these choices.
I'm happy to add to that a little bit as well about what we're doing in
Thank
the UK,
you.
if that's helpful. In the UK, it's a bit interesting. So what most venues are doing is saying, yep, you have to show proof of your vaccination or a negative lateral flow test. So they're not mandating you have to have, you know, the vaccine. It can be you've got a negative test. And we had a big conversation about this for a charity comedy night that I did. And actually, similarly, Liz, actually, as it turned out, the conversation was out of our hands because it was the venues regulation. And they said, we are asking for proof of vaccination or negative lateral flow. And similarly, their security staff did that. So none of our event team, none of our volunteers had to challenge anyone that maybe didn't have that. It was done by the security staff. But we had a similar agreement that we said, actually, we would have that same policy. And if we needed to pay for security staff, then we would, because we didn't want to put our, our standard event teams, our standard volunteers in that position. It needed to be people who, if it was a tricky conversation, were trained to be able to have that tricky conversation, or empowered to say, actually, we're not allowing you access to this event. So yeah, I think I agree that being broadly driven by what your government or state or local authorities are saying is a good starting point, but also balance that with your own internal risk assessments and who your audiences are as well. The flip side, another charity I'm working with, a charity with for children who have cancer, and we're not doing any in-person events for them because it's a completely different risk scenario than a fundraising event. So we're still not doing in-person events for those children, for example. So yeah, it is just a balancing act. And what I would say is, as long as you've got it all documented of this was the decision we made and why, and this is who signed off on that, you've always got that to fall back on then as well.
It does also link to a question I had for both of you, actually, which was around how did you manage, either before events or during and after events, people on both sides of that slightly controversial question? So people who don't feel you should be putting on events, or those people who were either anti-vax or anti-mask or whatever their position might be. Are you building a communications plan for people, or do you have standard answers? So how are you preparing or dealing with it on the day?
Yeah, I think for that comedy night in particular, that's exactly what we did. We pre-drafted, we worked what our COVID safety standards were into all of the event communications. We had a separate page that said, this is what we are doing. So as well as the standard regulations, it was us and the venue. We'd say, we encourage masks when you're moving around the venue. Again, UK law at the minute, you can't enforce it, but we were encouraging it. Hand sanitizer everywhere, all that kind of stuff. And we just had that all listed out really, really, really clearly for people and included it as part of our communications that went out in advance. And we also had standard responses scripted in advance if anyone asked. But to be honest, we didn't actually have any pushback. And for that comedy night in particular, the other thing we did is that we also live streamed that. So that was another, again, it just proactively said to people, if you don't want to be in a crowd again yet, we totally understand. You can buy a virtual ticket instead. So I do think there's something around hybrid and blended events as well for coming back to in-person events. Obviously, physical events, a marathon, a cycle, what have you, is tricky to blend in that way. But if you're doing dinners or shows or any sort of entertainment type events, I would strongly recommend looking into having a virtual option as well, which again helps allay people's fears and concerns a little bit, because they know they can still take part, albeit virtually.
Thank you. Liz, any? Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I echo everything that Sarah just said, because we've done the same things at the National MS Society. That communication plan is extremely important, and we made sure that we posted our communication and our stance on our websites. It went out in all pre-event communications. We made sure it's something that was very accessible. I will say, the one thing that we have definitely had some donors that have been very upset, not about vaccines, right? Because the government is really regulating and guiding that. But where we've seen people be more upset is in having to wear a mask to an event. We're very divided as a nation in the mask or anti-mask. And so we have had to have a lot of one-on-one conversations. Again, we've made sure that that was very rooted in our communication. And our stance is really, it's about the person living with MS. It's the reason that we're here, and we want to protect their safety and their health. And we want to make the best environment possible for everybody. So we root it in our mission when we're having difficult conversations. But I wish I could say that we've had none. We've had a lot of difficult conversations there.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, guys. I understand there's a question from Mai in Egypt.
Yeah. So she has asked, considering all these precautions, do you think for a small organization, the cost benefits of what do you think sort of the cost benefit of an in-person event is, like in terms of can they still be profitable to hold an event in person?
Yeah, so I mean, my perspective is, and I don't know how small we're talking, but my perspective is that they can be very beneficial, but you really need to understand if your donors and supporters want to come back in person and lean on them as a guide and how they're feeling. And if they're feeling like, we're not ready, it's not quite right, I don't know that I would take the time to put the investment in all the protocol and the hand sanitizer and all of that. If they are ready, I think you'll likely have the same experience that we've had, or that you heard Rob talk about in the video as well, that if they're ready, they come back, they support. The average donation